Hi, everyone. My name's Beatriz. If you asked me what's your strongest childhood memory, I'd answer right away. My parents' never-ending fights. They were yelling at each other all the time. Even when I was little, I could see that they hated each other's guts. Eventually, they decided to get a divorce. Even though I was only 7 at the time, I was so happy when I found out. I remember something funny. I was so used to their fighting that when Mom said, "Beatriz, your dad won't be living here with us," I asked her, "So will you be fighting over the phone?" Even after the divorce, they still had to deal with each other because of me. My dad really loved me. He'd pick me up every Saturday morning and bring me back Sunday night. My mom had to stop working after she had me. After the divorce, she looked for a job but couldn't find one. So we had to rely on the money we got from my dad. My dad really loved me. He composed music for commercials. I really loved music, and sometimes he would take me to his friends' concerts. At one of those concerts, I saw a ukulele for the first time. Because it was so small, I thought it was a special guitar for kids. I asked him, "Dad, will you get me a kitty guitar?" My dad laughed so hard. He got me the ukulele after the concert. My dad could play many instruments. He started to teach me how to play the ukulele. Around that time, my mom got a new boyfriend. The guy was staying with us often, and for some reason, my mom wanted me to call him Dad. That weekend, I told my father about it. He got really upset. He called up my mom. He said, "Why are you forcing Beatriz to call someone she doesn't even know Dad? If that man comes to your house again, I'm not bringing her back." They had a huge fight over the phone. When my dad dropped me off at home on Sunday, she said, "Don't you dare threaten me again, or this will be the last time you see Beatriz." After that, they had an even bigger fight. Dad came to my room before leaving. He had a phone he only used for work. He gave it to me. He said, "Honey, if that man stays here again, please call me." Then he gave me a kiss and left. Normally, my dad would call me every evening. The next evening, he didn't call, so I called him. His phone kept ringing, but he didn't pick up. I called him again the next day. This time, his phone was off. I told my mom about it because I was worried, but she didn't care. She got mad when she found out that my dad gave me a phone and took it away. That Saturday, I woke up early as always and waited for my dad to arrive. He hadn't called me all week, but I was sure he would come. But he didn't. We waited until noon. Finally, my mom got worried too. "His phone is off. I'll go over to his house," she said, and left. When she came back, she said, "I rang the bell, but no one opened the door." Unfortunately, after that day, we didn't hear from my father again. If something horrible had happened to him, we would have found out. It seemed like my dad had disappeared on purpose. Since we stopped getting money from him, my mom started looking for work again. Thankfully, she was able to find a job at a supermarket. However, the money she was making wasn't even enough for the rent. We had to move to a smaller house. After that, things just kept getting worse. We were moving all the time. There were times when we got evicted because we couldn't pay rent. My mom wasn't in a good place mentally. When she'd lose her job, we would move in with my aunt's family for a while. Yes, our life was really hard, but I didn't really care about that. All I worried about was my dad. I missed him a lot. Some nights I'd fall asleep holding my kitty guitar, which reminded me of him. When I was a sophomore in high school, my mom started talking to a man she met online. But she couldn't meet him because he lived in another city. One day she told me, "Brett wants us to move in with him. What do you say?" This meant that we would be moving to another city and I would have to change schools, but I still said yes. Because after all these years, there was finally someone in my mom's life, and Brett seemed like a really nice guy. Moving in with Brett turned out to be the best decision we ever made. For the first time in my life, I finally felt at peace. Brett was a lawyer, and he wanted me to study law because he thought I could become successful at it. This seemed like a good idea to me. I decided I should start preparing for college. I thought I should do some volunteering so I could put it on my application. Through my school, I found that I could volunteer at a soup kitchen. They sent me to a soup kitchen that needed help. I began going there twice a week. You know, usually it's the homeless who eat at soup kitchens. In the city where I used to live, there were many homeless people. I would cross to the other side of the street every time I saw a homeless person because they smelled really bad. However, working at the soup kitchen made me see things differently. Sure, they still smelled bad, but they were human beings just like the rest of us, and for most of them, Living on the street wasn't a choice. After a while, I got to know a lot of homeless people. Some of them were real characters. They made me laugh a lot. I was looking forward to going to work each day. One evening on my way to the shelter, I saw a man lying down on a bench. He wasn't like the other homeless people I knew. He looked really, really bad. I nudged him. He looked up at me. "I can take you somewhere where you can eat," I said. Before he could answer, he put his head down again. He closed his eyes. I repeated what I just said, but he didn't respond. I gave him whatever change I had and kept walking. The following day, I saw the same man again. This time he was sitting. He had a blank look in his eyes. I sat next to him. He didn't look at me. I asked, "Are you hungry?"
Oh.
He didn't respond. I stood up. I grabbed his arm and tried to pull him up. "Please come with me. We'll go somewhere where you can eat," I said. He stood up without saying anything. We started walking together. I was used to the way homeless people smelled, but this guy was really bad. Also, his face was so dirty you couldn't see what he looked like. It was like he was wearing a mask made out of mud with just 2 holes for the eyes. When we got to the soup kitchen, I took him to the bathroom. "You need to wash your hands. You can't eat like this," I told him. He still didn't react. I went in with him. I turned on the water. I washed his hands with soap. Then I lathered his face for a really long time. Then I rinsed it with water. When he looked up, I couldn't believe my eyes. It was my father. "Dad!" I screamed and hugged him. He didn't respond. "Dad, it's me, Beatriz, your daughter, Beatriz!" I was screaming. I finally found my dad, but he didn't seem to recognize me. He was just staring at his face in the mirror. That was probably because he was seeing his own face for the first time in years. We had a volunteer at the shelter named Matthew. I thought he could help me because he was homeless too. When I told my story to Matthew, he was really surprised. "I've seen your dad around for years. He never talks to anyone. He's always been this way. He probably has a mental illness," he said. I couldn't take him home in this condition. Matthew lived in an abandoned building with a few other people. I asked, "Can my dad stay with you for a while? I'm going to look for a way to take him to a doctor." He nodded. He promised me he'd look after my dad. That night when I came home, I told my mom and Brett that I found my father. My mom couldn't believe what she was hearing. She said, "Are you sure? Maybe it's just someone who looks like him." I said, "I thought about that too. That's why I'm going to do a little test tomorrow." Brett said, "I can help you find a doctor," and I was so moved that I hugged him. I told you he was a really nice person. The next day, I went to where Matthew lived. My dad was sitting outside staring blankly into space. I took out my ukulele. Yes, that was the test. If it was really my father, I thought he'd definitely react to the ukulele. But he didn't even look at me. I started playing, trying to remember some of the chords he had taught me. After a little while, he reached over. He touched the ukulele and said, "Kitty guitar." I looked at his face. He looked at me. "Kitty guitar," he repeated. I embraced him and began to cry. My dad kept saying, kitty guitar," as if he was desperately holding on to something he had trouble remembering. I thought my dad was mentally ill, but when we went to the hospital, it turned out that I was wrong. The doctor gave my dad a thorough examination. He did a lot of tests. Finally, he gave us a diagnosis. According to the doctor, my dad had suffered a severe concussion. That means he hit his head really hard. He was probably involved in a car accident. As a result, he had what's known as a traumatic brain injury. If the impact on the head is too severe, there might be permanent damage that affects cognitive abilities. That was why my dad was like this. The concussion caused some kind of mental defect. The worst part is that it can't be treated. We don't know how my dad ended up in a different city. My theory is that after leaving our house, he was hit by a car. The driver must have put him in his car to take him to a hospital, but then changed his mind and brought him somewhere he wouldn't be recognized by anyone, which is the city we now live in. I thought my dad had left us, but he'd been living here all this time. Thanks to Brett, we moved my dad into an assisted living facility. I go to visit him every day. I tell him about everything that has happened over the years. I don't know how much of it he understands, but I still really enjoy spending time with my dad. I also play the ukulele for him. He sings along saying, kitty guitar, kitty guitar.
Hey everyone, I'm Laura. I'm sure many of you dread getting stuck in an elevator. How about getting stuck in an elevator for 7 hours with your worst enemy? Sounds terrible, right? Unfortunately, that's what happened to me. My parents got divorced when I was very small. I'm more like my dad, so I can't say that my mom and I get along very well. We managed fine for a while, but things have gotten a lot worse recently. One day, my mom and I had a huge fight. When that happens, I usually go and stay with my dad. I packed a few things, shut the door, and left. We live in a 16-story building with 2 elevators, one big, one small. I called the elevator. The small one came. I wish it were the big one, I thought to myself, because I'm claustrophobic. If I stay in a narrow place for a while, my chest tightens and I can't breathe. If I stay even longer, I lose control and have a panic attack. But that day I wanted to get away from my mom as quickly as possible, so I got into the small elevator. On the way down, it stopped on the 6th floor. I hope it's not Brittany, I thought, and then I saw that it was her. Brittany is the only enemy I have. Unfortunately, we live in the same building. She was on the phone and sounded upset. I'm home. Where else can I be? I'm about to get into the elevator. I'll lose connection. I'll call you back, she said. The elevator door closed. She noticed that she wasn't alone. She was about to say hi, but when she saw that it was me, she clearly wasn't happy. Oh, great, she said, and started randomly pressing the buttons. She wanted to get off before we reached the ground floor. Don't worry, I don't bite, I said. She coldly replied, you couldn't even if you wanted to. When she said this, the elevator started shaking and then stopped as if hanging in midair. Brittany waited for the door to open so she could go out. When it didn't, she pressed the open button. Nothing happened. So she started randomly pressing buttons again. I couldn't help myself and said, will you stop doing that? That's what got us stuck in the first place. She met my eyes for the first time. Because of me? I think you should stop blaming others for the bad things that happen in your life, she said. I knew what she meant by that, but I kept quiet because I was already sweating. I had to get out of there as soon as I could. I'd had 3 panic attacks in my life. I knew how bad they were, and I didn't want to have another one. I tried to pry the elevator doors open. I pulled as hard as I could, but it didn't work. Brittany started punching the door. She was shouting, anyone there? We're stuck in the elevator. Anyone there? We were probably stuck between 2 floors, so it was really difficult for someone to hear us. Brittany took out her phone. She knew that there was no signal in the elevator, but she still wanted to give it a shot. She tried calling someone, but of course it wasn't going through. We both knew that the second you step into an elevator in this building, you lose connection and the internet stops working. Brittany was standing right in front of the buttons. Can you move over? I asked. She did. Just as I thought, there was an emergency button with the alarm sign on it at the bottom. I pressed it for a very long time. We didn't hear anything, so the alarm must be ringing somewhere else. But where? When would the person who hears the alarm come, and how would they get us out of here? My chest started tightening. Now, on top of the sweating, I was also having trouble breathing. Brittany sat on the floor. She took out a pack of cookies from her bag and started eating. I remembered that I hadn't had breakfast. It would have been nice to have one, but I'd rather die than ask Brittany for a cookie. Anyways, she wouldn't give me any, even if I asked, since we're enemies. Actually, I was the first one to say, you are my enemy. To which she replied, in that case, you are my enemy too. Do you want to know what happened? I'm sure you'll side with me when I tell you about what made me say that. Brittany moved into our building with her family last summer. I saw her around, but we hadn't been introduced. When school started, I saw that we were in the same class. Eventually, we became friends. Since we lived in the same building, we would hang out after school, too. I shouldn't have trusted someone I had just met, but I ended up sharing a lot of personal stuff with her. I told her about the guy I had a crush on. I was totally in love with John, but I thought I had no chance with him because he was one of the most popular guys at school. When I told Brittany, she tried to encourage me. She said something like, don't belittle yourself, let him know that you're interested. One day she said, I'm going to try to talk to John. I think he likes you too. We'll find out if he does. So she started coming up with excuses to hang out with him. A few weeks later, she said, I want to talk to you about something, and invited me over. Turns out she and John got really close. They were texting each other all night. She shamelessly said, "I am aware of your feelings, but I fell in love with John. There's nothing I can do about it." I was totally shocked. "Brittany, you're kidding, right?" I said. "I'm afraid not. Please understand me," she said. Obviously, there was no way I'd understand her. She had betrayed me. I knew that she actually liked someone else, so it made no sense for her to start dating John. We had a huge fight that day, and then kept fighting through text messages at night. The next morning at school, I called her over. "You betrayed me. You are my enemy now," I said. She said the same thing to me too. We stopped being friends right away. That is, until we got stuck in the elevator. In my whole life, I only ever had one enemy, and now I was stuck in an elevator with her for the past 4 hours. There was no sound coming from outside. We kept on pressing the emergency button, but nobody was coming. Either the button was broken or nobody was checking because it was a weekend. I was feeling dizzy from hunger and claustrophobia. I was moments away from having a panic attack. All of a sudden, the elevator fell a few floors down with a loud bang. We both screamed. The elevator shook for a while and then stopped. When things had calmed down, I noticed that Brittany was holding my arm in fear. She felt ashamed and pulled away. When I looked at her, I smiled, and she smiled back. I was no longer strong enough to stand. So I sat down. Brittany took out the pack of cookies again. She offered me some. "I wanted to offer you some earlier, but I was afraid to," she said. I took a couple of cookies, and Brittany sat next to me. I was really dizzy, so I ate the cookies really fast. Did you know that I have claustrophobia? Don't be scared if I have a panic attack soon. I act really crazy when I have a panic attack, but I won't hurt anyone except myself, I said. I teared up and had to hold back from crying. She said, "You never told me about that. My mom has claustrophobia too. She can't even wear a turtleneck." She reached forward. "Close your eyes. That's how I always calm my mom down," she said, and held my hand. Then in a gentle voice she said, "We're on a beautiful beach now. The sea is in front of us, and the sky is above us. Look around. What do you see?" Tears were rolling down my cheeks. I said, "The sea is in front of us, and the sky is above us." She continued, "We're sitting on the sand. Can you smell the sea?" I was really relaxed. "Yes," I said. "I can hear the waves too." Then we actually heard something. "Hey! Hey!" I opened my eyes. "This doesn't sound like a wave. I think someone's here to help," I said, and got up. "Help us! There are 2 of us here!" I yelled. There was an immediate response. "Be patient, I'll get you out of there." I was already feeling better thanks to Brittany, and now with the hope of being saved, I was much better. I started laughing out loud. I looked at Brittany. She was sulking for some reason. "We're getting out! Cheer up!" I yelled. She took a deep breath. "You know, Laura, John is a total control freak. He's so jealous. He suffocates me. I want to get rid of him, but I can't break up with him because that'll make you happy," she said. I wasn't expecting her to say something like that. I screamed with joy. "What? A control freak? I hate guys like that." "Me too. Now that I confessed this to you, I can dump John as soon as we get out of here," she said. The elevator made a loud noise and shook again. We screamed and hugged each other, but this time we weren't going down, we were going up. When we realized that, we started yelling happily. They slowly pulled the elevator up. It took around half an hour. We were now able to hear voices much more clearly. The door opened slightly. We saw 2 dirty hands reaching inside. Then finally the doors opened. There was an overweight guy with oil all over him. He was almost out of breath. "The guys called me right away when they got your emergency call, but I had to set up a safety wire to pull you up. That takes a long time to do." "I'm sorry you were stuck here for such a long time," he said. It really was a terrible experience, but we were finally out. I was so happy that I kissed the man. Brittany and I ran down the stairs. When we were outside, I stopped and looked at the sky. Life was beautiful. I turned to Brittany and saw that she was on the phone. "Are you calling John?" I asked. "No, John left me 35 voicemails when he couldn't reach me. I'm listening to them, she said, smiling. We grabbed some coffee and went to a park. Brittany called John and told him she wanted to break up. After she hung up, she looked me in the eyes and sincerely apologized to me. I'm such a stupid teenager. Will you be able to forgive me? She asked. Those 7 hours we spent together inside the elevator had formed a special new bond between us. As another stupid teenager, I forgave the only person who was my enemy.
Hi. What I'm about to tell you took place in New York. Once you've heard the whole story, I'm sure you will want to share it with someone. Because it's interesting in so many ways. You will definitely be blown away by the ending too. Our story begins when 19-year-old Bobby arrives at the college where he is going to study. It was his first day at the school. Naturally, he didn't know anyone. It was his first time away from his family. He was excited and a little nervous. He was going to stay at a dorm on campus. He wanted to go and settle into his room right away. As he was walking towards the dormitory, carrying his suitcase, strange things started happening. Other students were greeting him saying, "Hi, what's up? How was your summer? Nice to see you again." They all seemed to know him. Even though people were acting like his friends, it was Bobby's first time seeing them. It felt almost like a hidden camera prank. Finally, he arrived at his dorm building. When he walked in, someone shouted, "Welcome back, Eddie." Eddie? Who is that? When someone else said, "Hi, Eddie," he couldn't take it anymore. "My name is not Eddie," he snapped. The person smiled back saying, "You're so funny, Eddie." Bobby found his room. He began unpacking his suitcase. There was a knock on the door. When he opened it, there was a guy around his age. While Bobby was waiting for him to say something, the guy's eyes widened. He was speechless for a while. Then he asked, "Were you born on July 12th?" When Bobby said, "Yes." The guy said, "Are you adopted?" Bobby said, "Yes," again. And the student said, "You won't believe this, but you have a twin. His name is Eddie. I'm Eddie's best friend. You look a lot like him, but I knew you were not Eddie," he said. This is how Bobby found out that he had a twin named Eddie, whom he knew nothing about until then. Without wasting time, he got in the car with Eddie's friend and they drove to the city where Eddie lived. When they got to the house, Bobby knocked on the door. A moment later, someone who looked just like him opened the door. It was Eddie. They were both very surprised. They felt as if they were looking in the mirror. Of course, it was natural for them to be so surprised. If you had grown up with a twin, it wouldn't be as shocking to see someone who looked just like you. But they didn't know they had a twin until they were 19 and only met then. This was in the days before the internet. There were newspapers, TV, and radio. When a newspaper heard about this, they sent a reporter right away. The reporter wrote about Bobby and Eddie, who just found out that they were twins. A photographer took photos of them. When the story ran, everyone was talking about it. But that wasn't the end of it. There was another twist to the story. Elsewhere in the country, a mom came running to her son's room. She tried to wake him up. "David, get up. You need to see this." She was screaming and showing him the newspaper she was holding. David finally got himself up. He took the paper from his mom and read the headline, "Twins separated at birth reunite after 19 years." He looked at the photo in the story. When he realized the two people in the photo looked exactly like him, he jumped up from his bed. When he calmed down, he called the paper, told them about his situation, and asked for a phone number where he could reach the twins. Of course, the people at the paper were surprised too. They gave him Eddie's phone number. David called the number. Eddie's mother picked up. "They are not twins, they are triplets, and I'm their brother," he said. She was so shocked that she dropped the phone. The triplets organized a get-together right away. Even though they had just met, they immediately felt as if they had grown up together. Thanks to their special connection, they never felt like strangers. Everyone was interested in their incredible story. They were interviewed on different TV shows. They were getting famous. Now everyone in the country knew of the triplets that were reunited when they were 19. But how were they separated in the first place? First of all three of them were adopted. A private adoption agency in New York gave them to 3 different families. These couples didn't know the child they adopted was a triplet. The agency had kept this fact from them. After learning this, the adopted families got together and went to visit the adoption agency. They had a meeting with the management. Their first question was, "Why didn't you tell us these kids were triplets?" It was impossible to find a family that would accept all 3 babies. That's why we had to separate them, they explained. All 3 families said, "If you had told us, we would have taken them. We would not have separated them." They weren't satisfied with the agency's explanation. They left the agency angry and frustrated. One of the fathers realized he forgot his umbrella there. He went back to pick it up. He saw something strange when he went back into the meeting room. He had saw the people they had met with opening a bottle of champagne and clinking their glasses. The managers of the agency were celebrating. He picked up his umbrella and left. He described what he had seen to the other parents. Of course, they were shocked. They couldn't understand what they were celebrating after such a tense meeting. Years later, they would learn that the agency had lied to them that day. There was another reason why they hid the fact that the boys were triplets. They were celebrating the fact that they had managed to keep that reason a secret. So, what was the real reason? You will soon find out. At the time, the triplets were enjoying being reunited after so many years. They moved in together. Every day they were seeing how much they resembled each other. For example, they found out that they liked the same type of clothes, same food, same colors, and even the same brands. The funniest part was they were completing each other's sentences. So even though they had grown up in 3 different households, they were still very similar. The brothers kept appearing on TV shows as guests. That made them even more famous. People on the street were telling them, "Why don't you guys make a movie? We want to see you on the big screen." The brothers figured out that it was time to monetize their newfound fame and opened a huge restaurant they named Triplets. People filled the restaurant to see the famous triplets. The business was really good. They made over $1 million at the end of their first year. Meanwhile, a journalist had uncovered something big. A child psychiatrist had launched a secret study years earlier. For this project, he had made an agreement with a private adoption agency. The agency would separate twins and give them to families of different socioeconomic status. Because the goal of the study was to determine how different they would grow up to be if they were raised in different families. The worst part was, they were hiding from the adopting family the fact that their baby had a twin. You see what happened, right? The mother of the triplets brought her babies to this adoption agency. The agency gave the triplets to 3 families of different status as part of this secret study. To understand this further, let's take a look at Bobby, Eddie, and David's families. Bobby's dad was a doctor, and his mom was a lawyer. They were a well-educated couple. They earned a lot of money. They lived in an expensive neighborhood. Eddie's father was a school teacher. They weren't rich or poor. It was a middle-class family. They led a lifestyle befitting their income. And finally, David's family was working class. They were immigrants. They were the least educated among the parents. They ran a small grocery store and had a hard time making ends meet. Thus, we can clearly see that one of the triplets was given to a family with a higher level of income and education, another one to a middle-class family, and the third one was given to a lower-income family with a lower level of education. It was also discovered that the people conducting this secret study paid regular visits to the children. They ran intelligence and personality tests that lasted for hours. They observed them in their daily lives and took notes. For example, to see if there were any differences in their hand-eye coordination, they filmed the children playing frisbee. These home visits lasted until the kids were about 9 to 10 years old. Then suddenly they stopped. So why weren't the families suspicious of these visits? These are routine tests that we conduct on every adopted child. We need to keep track of these kids as an agency, they were told. Which was not true. As we know now, the tests were being done for the secret study. The journalist who uncovered this horrible truth also found the psychiatrist behind the study. He learned that the study continued for about 10 years and then was stopped. The results hadn't been shared with the public since it was assumed it would elicit a negative reaction. We know that all of the records related to this case remain sealed in the Yale University archives. The journalist also traced the children in the study and visited those he could find. Of course, they were all grown up. He saw that the twins separated at birth were struggling with chronic depression at later stages of their lives, including the triplets. They were having really serious mental health issues. Tragically, one of them, Eddie, died when he was only 33 years old.